Hi, and welcome to TaskTex, a technique for making time blocking more effective. My name is Trevor Lohrbeer, the founder of Day Optimizer, a time management web app that helps solopreneurs create daily plans that reflect their priorities using workflows based on neuroscience principles. So what can you expect from today's talk? Well, I'm going to explain what time blocks are. That's a little redundant, so we're at the Task and Time Blocking Summit. But I'm going to explain what they are and the issues that can occur when using them. Then we're going to drill into the different types of time blocks and how to define them. Then I'll jump in and explain what a task stack actually is and what are some of the benefits of using task stacks. And finally, we'll end with how to use task stacks to make your time blocking more effective, both digitally and on paper. So before we get started, a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Trevor Lohrbeer. I'm the founder of Day Optimizer, a time management web app. My mission is to help others live more fulfilling lives by reaching their potential. I do this by creating mental models and frameworks that help people reason about the world in new ways to solve existing problems. For attending the summit, you'll also gain a copy of my book, Mindful Productivity, which teaches you how to make an impact while living a good life. This is the first draft of my book. This presentation will hopefully make it into the second draft. So what is a time block? A time block is time set aside to work on a task or a group of tasks. Now, it's not necessary, but we usually schedule time blocks in our calendar. Time blocks give us a defined period within which to work, and that defined period gives us a container for focus. If I know I can only work from 9 until 11, that helps me stay more focused and not get distracted because I don't have an indefinite amount of time. It can also act as an artificial time constraint. As we'll see later on, we can run into something called Parkinson's law, where our tasks will just expand to fill whatever time we give it. By creating time blocks, we can shorten the amount of time that we give to tasks to trick ourselves into working more efficiently. And finally, it's an appointment for work. And that appointment can help us minimize distraction and procrastination. Because if I said I'm going to start working on something at 9 and it's 9 o'clock, it's very hard to say I'm not going to actually start working on it. So how do we define time blocks? Well, one way we define them is what we're actually going to work on, right? So we can work on a specific task. Right? I need to finish my taxes, or I need to create a time blocking presentation, for instance, or a set of tasks. I pick 1 or 2 tasks to work on. I can work on a facet. A facet in this area is, if you're familiar with getting things done, an area of focus, responsibility, or interest. So it's a category of tasks to work on, like marketing, admin, email, etc. We can have context blocks. So I'm at the office, so I need to do office work. Or I want to base it on what energy or the mood I'm in. So I want to do a deep work state. Finally, we use protected blocks. And these are blocks that we're blocking off our calendar less as a container, more to prevent other people from scheduling that time on our calendar. And these tend to be very broadly defined, like personal time or work time. So it could be anything within that time. Second is, we often don't necessarily think about it, but we need to define how much time to spend. And when we create a time block, we have different ways that we can define how much time to spend. So we can give it a fixed amount of time and say, okay, I'm going to be working for 2 hours. I'm going to work from 9 until 11. And this is the normal way we create time blocks. But we have other ways. For instance, we can have a threshold and say, okay, I'm going to work for a minimum of a half an hour. I'm going to try to work for 2 hours, but I have to work a minimum of half an hour. This can be useful when we're trying to get into flow states, and we force ourselves to work on our thing to see if we can get into the flow state. And then if we can't, then maybe we switch to something else. But by defining that minimum threshold, we force ourselves to overcome our mood, which tends to be fickle, and dive into what we really need to do. Another one is an extendable time. So maybe I say it's 2 hours, but if I'm really in the flow, I'm going to keep going. So one way I often recommend is whenever you're scheduling time blocks that are creative or deep work time blocks where you might get in the flow, schedule an optional time block after that. That way, if you're in the flow, you can just extend through that and just drop the optional time block. Finally, you have constrained time blocks. And this is where I say, whatever task or thing I'm going to do is I have to get it done within this time period. And this is really useful for subverting Parkinson's law, which is the law that says that a task will expand to fill the amount of time we give it. So if I say I have 2 hours to write a blog post, it's probably going to take me 2 hours to write a blog post. But if I say, hey, I only have a half an hour to write a blog post, and I have to be finished within that half an hour, then I'm going to figure out a way to finish that blog post in half an hour. It may not be the same quality or the same scope as if I gave it the same 2 hours, but that may not matter. Sometimes we are too much our own perfectionists, and we really need to focus on getting something out there in the world rather than trying to make it perfect. So I do want to mention that constrained time blocks are often called time boxes. So if you've heard that terminology of time blocking and time boxing is where I set a container for a time where I have to finish the task at the end of that time. Time blocking is just the amount of time I'm working on a task or working on a facet. So I don't necessarily need to finish at the end of that time. So here we have a couple examples. A deep work block. This is an energy block from 9 until 11:30. So this is a context-based block. We have a task block where I'm finishing my taxes from 3 until 4. And then we have a facet block from 4 to 5, which is where we're going to be working on marketing. So what are some of the benefits of time blocks? Well, first of all, they create containers to work on specific facets of our life. And it lets us compartmentalize our different life and create boundaries between the different parts of our life. That grants us this psychological freedom to not think about those facets outside of those containers. So if I'm scheduling a work block, I can say, okay, I'm only going to do the work and think about work during that work block. Outside of that work block, once I'm in my personal block, I don't want to think about that. Or if we're drilling down a little bit in there, like maybe I need to juggle multiple priorities. I need to do client work, I need to do marketing, I need to do admin. By creating time blocks around these different facets of our business, we can then compartmentalize our thinking and say, okay, I'm really going to try to only think and do stuff around marketing in my marketing time block, because I also need to do client work, I also need to do admin work, et cetera, et cetera. And so this gives us the psychological freedom to say, hey, that'll be taken care of. And if I think of something outside of that block, I can write it down and deal with it in that time block. This allows us to balance competing priorities. So by allocating time to our different time blocks, to our different competing priorities, I can make sure that everything is getting done. So if you're a solopreneur, you're often running through this problem called feast and famine, where you do a bunch of work, sales and marketing work, to get a bunch of clients. Now you have a bunch of clients, so you focus on the client work and you drop the ball on the sales and marketing work. You may also be doing so much client work, you forget to do the admin work. You forget to send out your invoices, so you don't get paid. And so suddenly you need to then drop your client work and jump over to the admin work, and then the project's end and you need to do more admin work, and so now you're back in the famine zone. Now, this isn't exclusive to solopreneurs. Lots of people run into these things where they have multiple competing priorities they need to do. So how do you handle that? Well, you allocate time each day or each week to handling each of your priorities, right? And an effective way of doing that is create time blocks and say, I'm going to be working on marketing for the next 2 hours, and then I'm going to work on admin for an hour, then I'm going to do 2 hours of client work. And so this ability to allocate time across our time blocks helps us balance these competing priorities. And finally, as I mentioned before, it dedicates this time to focus, right? I'm saying I have these 2 hours. This is the only time I have to work on marketing, so I really need to buckle down and do it. And it allows me to make progress on my tasks. So especially if you're doing time blocking versus time boxing, taking that mentality of my goal in this time block isn't to finish it, it's just to move the ball forward, right? Hopefully I can finish some of these tasks, but if the tasks are very large tasks, the goal is to move the ball forward. So what are some of the issues using time blocks? Well, first of all, is having unclear next steps. So many of you have probably run into this thing where you schedule a time block on your calendar, you switch to the time block at the right time. Okay, you're on it, but you don't actually know what to work on, right? So you start looking through your master task list, and then maybe you get distracted by something on that task list that isn't even in this time block. So you have a marketing time block, but you're there like, oh yeah, I forgot to send out the invoices. So now your brain's thinking about that, even though you're trying to focus on marketing, and now you're distracted. Maybe even switch to that. But even if you don't, you're wasting your brain energy thinking about those things on that list. Or you start looking, you have different task lists for each facet, and you jump to that marking list and you say, okay, what do I need to work on? But now you take one of the easy tasks, and it's not actually the most important task, or the task you really should be working on. It's the task that's the task of least resistance, right? And this is where we come into the productive procrastination, where we do things that do need to get done, but aren't actually the highest priority. Another thing that happens is where we allocate too much time. This is particularly when we're using task-based time blocks, right? Where I schedule a task block on my calendar, I switch to it at the time, but then I'm working at a slower pace than normal. This is what I talked about before, Parkinson's law, where tasks expand to fill the time given to them. And so if I say allocate 2 hours to write a blog post, it's going to take me 2 hours to write a blog post. Whereas if I only allocate an hour, it might only take me an hour. However, maybe I don't give it enough time. So I really actually do want to give it enough time to kind of work through it. So one of the issues that we don't tend to do is if I give it 2 hours, do the blog post an hour and end my time block early, or switch to the next task early. So allocating too much time is another issue we run into. And finally, we can skip our highest priorities, right? And this is what I talked a little bit about before, where I schedule a task on my calendar, I switch to the time block, but now I pick a lower priority for my list. And it's not like I'm picking a low priority strategically, where sometimes I'll pick a very small, quick task, like a 5, 10, 15-minute task to gain a little bit momentum, right? This is where I'm picking it without any good reason. And then I finish that task, and then instead of doing the most important task, I pick another low priority task, right? So maybe in that 2 hours, I did a bunch of marketing tasks, and I accomplished a lot. So I feel good about myself from the accomplished perspective, but I didn't actually do what I really needed to be doing. I didn't work on the most important thing. So while I got a lot accomplished, I didn't actually move forward in my business or my work. So let's dive over to task stacks and how task stacks can help this. So what is a task stack? A task stack is a list of tasks sorted by execution order, where all the tasks are hidden except for the next one. So what I want you to think about is a stack of cards where each card is a task. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick the top card off that stack, and we're going to work on that. And then we're going to do it again. So let's dive in. Some examples of a task stack here. Here's a marketing one. So my next task is to write a blog post. After that, I need to compose newsletters, analyze ads, post on Facebook, tweet. Again, if this was a normal list, when I scheduled my marketing time block, I might decide to tweet about the summit first instead of writing that blog post, which is the most important. When I have it as the task stack, the only thing I can see is the next item to do. I can only see write the blog post. For the house chores, I can only see fix the clock synced. All the rest of the stuff, I can't see. So I can't get distracted about with it. What is not in your awareness cannot distract you. So task stacks are a technique for helping you manage your awareness of what you need to do next. So the benefits of task stacks is that it reduces distraction because it prevents you from being distracted by other tasks on your list. It creates a bias for higher priorities. because while you can skip, you can always pull a card, then pull the next card, and keep working your way down the stack. It forces you to explicitly skip those tasks. And that little bit of friction is going to cause you to do more of your high priority tasks. It also helps surfaces priority misalignment. As we'll dive deeper into the technique, by tracking how often we skip, we can figure out things where we say it's important, but we keep skipping it, which means it's not actually important, or we're not actually treating it important. Our actions are not aligned with what we're saying is important. And finally, task stacks encourage smart work because it separates planning from execution. So what we're going to do with task stacks is we are going to build our task stack separate outside of our time block. So let's dive into how we actually use task stacks. So there are 4 steps to using a task stack. We're going to define it, we're going to collect everything that belongs in that stack, we're going to sort it, and we're going to then execute on that stack. Now, the definition is going to be the same as your time block. It's going to be something with a short name: marketing, admin, deep work, house chores, etc. That also indicates the inclusion criteria. We're going to collect everything that belongs in that category and put it in that stack. Then we're going to sort that stack. We're going to sort it from from the first to the last to be executed. Now, often that will be by priority, but it can be sorted in other ways. And then finally, when it comes time to do that time block, we're going to pull out our task stack that corresponds to that time block, and we're going to execute it. There's going to be some details on how we execute, though. So let's get into those in a second. So first, defining our task stack. As I mentioned before, we can use it the same ways we defined a time block. So define by facet: marketing, admin, house chores; by context, high energy with our phone; by time, like these are 5-minute tasks, 15-minute tasks, deep work tasks, or a combination thereof. So I might have 5-minute tasks I can do with my phone that are admin tasks. So those are quick phone tasks, right? That I might be able to do when I'm standing in line somewhere. Second, I'm going to collect all the tasks. Now, if you have a list or a folder system, add the tasks to a list or folder that represents that tasks. Some people like using tags instead, so you could tag it with the stack name. In some software, it can be more useful to create the stack name as a task and create the actual tasks within that stack as subtasks. We'll see why in a minute, because that can help you hide the tasks that are not at the top of the stack easier. Finally, if you're doing it on paper, you can write it on cards. So I often tell people that they can use blank business cards. So there's these nice colored blank business cards that you can buy, and you can write 1 task per card if you're using a physical stack. Next, we're going to sort our tasks from the first to the last. So a common way to do it is by priority, where you're sorting by importance and or urgency. Another one is to sort by energy. So sorting by tasks that require a lot of high energy to tasks that require low energy. That's using that kind of eat that frog mentality, do the hardest things first. You could do a momentum-based strategy where I actually include a couple quick wins and then go into deeper work, right? So short little tasks that help me feel more accomplished, that give me the couple dopamine hits that get me more focused to get into that deeper work. Another strategy, if you're a person who tends to have lots of unfinished projects or unfinished tasks, is to sort your open loops at the top. So you first focus on closing your open loops before you start new projects or create new loops. Finally, we're going to go to the execute phase. So now the first 3 steps we're going to do in a planning phase. And this might be an actual planning time block that we assign. Okay, we're going to go and we're going to plan our week, or we're going to go at the end of our week, reprioritize everything and sort in our planning session what our task stacks look like. Now we're actually in the time block. We're in our marketing or our house chores or our deep work time block. So now we need to execute. So we're going to pick a card off that top of the stack, right? The next thing to do. We don't get to see anything else, right? So we only get to see the next thing that's most important to do. Now, hopefully what we're going to do is we're going to just immediately start working on that task. But if the task requires conditions that we don't have, we can skip it. In this case, we can just skip it and put it a little bit further down on the stack and just leave it alone because the conditions weren't met. For instance, maybe I'm waiting on a reply from someone before I work on my report, and until I have that reply, I can't work on it. So I pulled that card, can't work on it, so I'm going to put it back in the stack. However, if there's no reason not to work on it, and I decide not to work on it because I don't have the energy, I don't have the focus or anything, I have to mark it as skip. So put a little mark on that saying I'm skipping this, or if I'm using a digital system, I'm going to increment the skip count. So 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And then I'm allowed to pick the next card off the top of the stack, right? Now, hopefully you're not going to skip too much. But what the skip does, it introduces a little bit of friction to prevent you from procrastinating and just kind of flipping through the entire deck to pick out the card you want. However, if it's clear that from the time you originally sorted it until your time block, that those priorities are no longer relevant, then it is okay to take a timeout and resort your stack. But what I want you to do is set a timer. Make it a 5-minute timer to resort that stack. And then finally, at the end, we have a card we're working on, and we're just going to work on it until it's done or our time block expires. So let's dive a little bit more into the rules and reiterate the rules. When we're picking the card, we take the next task from the top of the stack. No peeking, right? If you sort it properly, the next card is your next task. I also like to have a rule that requires a baseline effort. So if I'm going to pick a card from the stack, I need to work on it for 15 minutes or half an hour before I move on to the next one, or before even I decide to skip. What this does, it helps avoid distraction because we're not looking at anything else in our list. We're only seeing what's the next best thing to do. And it reduces procrastination by limiting your options. So it forces you to confront your procrastination. So if I really don't want to work on this, I have to, if I want to pick another card, I'm forcing myself to say, look, why are you procrastinating on this? And ask yourself that question. The second thing to skip is if you can't or won't do it, you can skip it. Now, again, if you can't do it for some reason, you're free to just skip it without incrementing the skip count. But if you won't do it because you're not in the mood, if it's possible to do, then you have to increment the skip count. You have to, if it's a physical card, I recommend putting a little hash mark on it. If it's a digital, add a skip count. The reason here is we want you to discourage skipping. We want to add a little friction into the process to force you to work your way through the stack. The other thing I recommend is having consequences. Create a rule that after 5 steps, create a rule that after 5 skips, you have to move the card to the bottom of the stack, right? So you can't just keep skipping your high priorities indefinitely. If you're skipping it 2, 3, 4 times and it's constantly at the top of the stack, it's obviously not the priority. It's obviously not the next thing to work on. Or you need to step back and introspect and say, why am I not working on this if this is the priority? So this is where it helps fix misalignments. Because if you start seeing my skip count get above 2 or 3 or 4, then you know it's not actually a priority, even though it's at the top of your stack. Okay, what happens if you need to resort? Now, again, if the next task is clearly wrong, you can resort. And actually, I would recommend if the next 3 tasks are clearly wrong, you can resort. But what I want you to do when you resort is don't resort the whole stack. you have time scheduled for that later in the week to resort the whole stack. You have this time block where you're supposed to be executing. So let's minimize the time for that. First, set a time limit. Only do like 5 minutes to figure out what your next 3 tasks are. And I want you to move the next 3 tasks to the top. And I don't want you to move just the next task to the top, because what this can lead to is cherry picking tasks and not actually sorting your stack, where you just flip through your stack. Oh, this is the next one I want to work on. I'm going to move that to the top. And then you skip actually sorting your task later in the week. And next time this time block rolls around, it's still not sorted properly. And you do the same thing. By forcing you to always identify the next 3, you're at least creating some sorting in this process. And you should, within 5 minutes, be able to identify your next 3 tasks. What the resort does, it allows flexibility for when priorities change in between your planning sessions, but it does limit rabbit holes. It avoids this, the productive procrastination where, one, I'm just going to go down and completely organize, and I'm going to say, okay, my task list isn't sorted, so let me spend a half an hour resorting my task stack, and suddenly I used up all my time for this execution time block actually planning when I shouldn't have. Or like I said, just picking one and identifying the next one and not actually using it as a task stack. So the final thing is that we do it. We work on the task until it's done or our time runs out. The rules is when it's done, we pick another. And so we're just working our way down the stack. Again, I recommend setting a baseline effort. So when you pick a card, you have to work on it for a certain amount of time, 15 minutes, half an hour, before you put it back in the stack. So it's possible where what your goal is when I pick a card is I don't need to finish it, I just want to move the ball forward on it. But make sure that you're actually working on it. You're not just like moving it, like doing a little bit of work. You're actually significantly moving the ball forward. So what this does is this helps keep, by using task stacks, it helps keep your time allocations at a high level so you can allocate your time strategically. I can think about how much time am I spending on marketing, how much time am I spending on client work, how much time am I spending on admin, not how much time am I spending tweeting, how much time am I spending writing blog posts, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it discourages the time stretching of Parkinson's law, where because we now are working from a stack and not individual tasks, if I have a 2-hour block, I can work my way down that stack, right? It's not just the first card. I need to work on the first card until it's done as fast as I can, and then do the next card, and then do the next card. So how do we actually implement task stacks? Well, first let me explain it on paper. So say you have one of these nice little cards. There we go. In the middle of the card, write your task title. Underneath that, you can write any like notes or descriptions of the tasks that are going to help you. I would recommend, if you have a trigger you're waiting for, write it at the top of that card, and that way you can immediately see, hey, I'm waiting for this. And that might be a conditional trigger, you know, I'm waiting for something to be delivered to me, or it could be a time-based trigger. You'll see in the lower left, there's the skip count. And that's probably the most important part of the card, right? Is every time you skip, you need to make a mark. This is what helps you keep track of how often you're skipping and how well aligned that task stack is to your actual priorities. Are your priorities aligning with what you're saying your priorities are? You know, are your actions aligning with what you say you want to do? And then you can put other optional data on the card as well. And now you've noticed I prefer using these little business size blank business cards that come in different colors, because then what you can do is you can have a different color for each task stack. So it makes it very easy. Now, if you need to use the same color for multiple task stacks, that what you do is on the back side of the card, write the task stack name. So on the back side of prepare taxes, maybe I'll have finance or admin as my task stack name. So that's how you'll implement task stacks on paper. So hopefully that gives you a conceptual idea of how you use them. And again, if you have a task stack on paper, whoop, you're going to pick one, then your next, and you just basically can keep them on your desk and just pick them off one at a time. But let's say you want to implement digitally. So I'm going to explain this in Todoist, but there's different ways to do this in different task management tools. So if you're using a task management tool, you'll see on the left-hand side how I've organized this. I've taken a project in Todoist, I've called it house chores, but then I've created two sections, a section called stack and a section called inbox. And if you'll notice, there's only one task that is outside of these sections. That's my next task. That's the task that's at the top of my stack. The stack section, which is collapsible, contains the whole rest of my stack. And I want to sort these in the execution order, right? Finally, I have an inbox just to use the kind of the idea of an inbox. If things come up in between planning sessions, I'll just add them to the inbox and then figure out where they go in the stack later. Now, when I'm actually executing these, so this is the left-hand side is what it might look like when I'm planning. When I'm actually executing and using these for my time block, it looks like the right-hand side. So my stack and inbox are collapsed, right? I can only see the next task. So I work on that task until it's done. When it's done, I expand the stack section, drag up the next task in that section, collapse it again, and start working on that. So that's how you would implement this in Todoist. Let's talk about how to implement it in Day Optimizer. So task stacks are going to be coming as a more full-blown feature in Day Optimizer, but right now you can implement them in Day Optimizer using something called checkbox lists. So here what I'm doing is I'm going to create a task, in this case fix house stuff, or I could have just called it house chores. And then in the notes you see I create these different lists of checkboxes: fix basement steps, fix gutter, clean office. I'm doing this by doing a left square bracket space, right square bracket space, and that allows me to then create a little checkbox list. I can keep an inbox list separate from that as well. And you can see down here on the lower right how this looks after I finish editing the task. I can have each checkbox, and I can click those checkboxes to mark it done and see the full list. But when it's collapsed, you'll notice the collapse view only shows me the next list to do. So again, what this allows me to do is see only the next item. And as I check things off the list, so if I checked off fix basement steps, that upper view, that collapse view, would then say fix gutter. Day Optimizer automatically knows which items you've checked off and shows you the next item you haven't checked off in the collapsed view. So that's another way you can implement task lists within Day Optimizer. Finally, for those of you who want to combine Todoist and Day Optimizer, I wanted to show a little hidden way of doing this, where we can actually take a project in Todoist and embed it within Day Optimizer. In this case, I've created it as an activity, so I can schedule during different days of the week. It's house chores, and then when I expand it, I get to see my Todoist project list. And in this case, what I've done is I've adjusted the size of that list so that way I can only see the next item in that list. In this case, fix basement steps. Now I can always scroll within that. That's a little scrollable window to see the other items in the list. But this is an easy way, if you already have a bunch of items in something like Todoist, to embed that within Day Optimizer. If you're interested in trying this out, this doesn't work for every task management tool, but Day Optimizer does have a hidden embed feature for Todoist and a hidden embed feature for some other tools. So please reach out to me at trevor@dayoptimizer.com and I'll give you a personal training on how to do this. So let's quickly review what we learned today. So time blocks are time set aside to work on a task or a group of tasks. They determine when to work. Task stacks are a list of tasks sorted by execution order where all tasks are hidden except for the next one. They determine what to work on and in what order. And so By having a task stack that you use in combination with your time block, you can make sure that your time blocks are more efficient, that you're executing, you're using your execution time of that time block more efficiently, you're getting distracted less, you're procrastinating less, and you are making sure that you're working on the most important items on your list. Thank you for attending. Any questions or comments, please email them to trevor@dayoptimizer.com or send a tweet to me at @fastfedora on Twitter. We've got the slides for this, a special offer for Day Optimizer. You get a discount for that, a free copy of the Mindful Productivity book, and more at dayoptimizer.com/time blocking summit. Thank you so much, and I wish you a productive day.